and the ebb and the flow of the House and life as an MP through this medium. On one hand, I can do a lot more in a day because I'm not hopping physically from meeting to meeting. I can get a lot more done. And on the other hand, Zoom fatigue, like everybody else, it's really hard to be on these screens all the time. So it's the only way I know. I certainly miss the profound connection one has when one is sitting in the House. I did enjoy that in my swearing in of the realization of the responsibility and the privilege to have been elected by my constituents on when I was sworn in, and I was in the House for 2 days, and I certainly missed that, but it will come with time.
So I understand from our technical people that I need to start over because
Again.
we started sooner than apparently we went live on Facebook.
Okay.
So I'm just going to say, and we'll pick up the conversation where we left off. I'm just going to say, I'm Steve Wernick, Rabbi Wernick, one of the rabbis at Bet Tzedek. I'm with Yara Sachs, who is still the rookie MP for York Center of the Liberal Party. And we just really started the conversation with a question of what was it like to start during COVID. The follow-up question is that as you've begun this work, has there been anything that surprised you?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that surprised me. Is first and foremost, I'm amazed at how well my staff have been able to pivot to us not, we started off actually being able to be in the office for a few weeks and had to switch a brand new staff and a brand new team to online, and everyone has moved really quickly to that space. And the other thing that has surprised me is as I've done more and more outreach this way with organizations and folks in the community, I'm blown away about how many people in York Center and how many organizations in York Center are actually working together as much as they can to help one another during this time. The amount of supports that are out there, it's amazing what constituents are doing to help one another during this time. And we kind of think that we're all in our own little bubbles right now of our own reality in COVID, and that's been revealed to me as how much interconnection there still is.
So what are some of the things that people are doing?
So one of the things that we've had is so over just before the Christmas break, one of the main charitable organizations in our riding called the Rima Foundation did a massive drive-through to provide food baskets and hampers with gifts for the kids and so on. And they orchestrated it in a way that was COVID safe and socially distanced and reached hundreds of families with hundreds of volunteers over an entire day. And they used technology with an app to get everyone pre-registered. And it was just like this drive-through of volunteers.
Like a drive-through assembly line, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was amazing. And it was just amazing to watch how they pulled that off. They've been continuing to do online homework clubs and supports for families. We have other organizations that have been doing work with seniors. B'nai B'rith has a whole system where they've preloaded tablets with music and activities and programs for seniors. So to reach the digital divide with individuals who normally wouldn't have access to technology and may not be able to afford internet access, they've set up a system so that they can still interact and be connected. I've seen examples of our urban farmers over at Downsview Park preparing food hampers to deal with food insecurity. I mean, it goes on and on. It's what I found is that not only have we pivoted in our business or organizational spaces, but neighbors are helping neighbors to pivot and support one another in ways that just are really personal and profound.
What we at Bet Tzedek did just yesterday is we had about 50 families cook with Chef Jeff Wagner And we prepared meals for Ve'ahavta and their bus to go and help people for homeless and those that are hungry. As you know, the holiday Purim is coming up, in which one of the mitzvot is matanot le'avyonim, is gifts for the poor. And also you give mishloach mano to, gifts to your friends and so forth. What we decided was to really emphasize not the mishloach mano to ourselves, but rather the gifts for the poor. And I got the chef's first name wrong. It's Jordan
Jordan
Wagman.
Wagman. I actually went
Um,
to high school with Jordan, and he is an amazing individual.
um,
So
so
like,
from those earlier days too. He was fantastic, and but there's about 250, 300 meals that we produced from this that are all being delivered today via Hafta. And the other thing that we're doing with Bet Tzedek and our partners at Beth Shalom, and I think it's St. Luke's and St. Michael, and we're helping to ensure 6,000 meals during the winter for
that's
those who need it
fantastic.
as well. I mean, I think that's one of the things that concerns me most as a rabbi and a religious leader in the community are the issues of food insecurity and hunger, especially during these times.
So that I would agree with you on that. One of the most prevalent, so when you asked me earlier what has surprised me was in my conversations of the level of food insecurity that's been revealed through this process of COVID, and how many members of the Jewish community and also the wider community are so dependent on the food banks and on the support from the community during this time. And it's really been an eye opener for me of how do we not only help folks now, but how are we going to look at that longer term in terms of when the foundation gets pulled out from under us, how are we going to make sure organizationally that we're well prepared to support individuals the next time for whatever it might be.
Personally, you're also a small business owner.
Yes.
And so that's the other like really scary area of impact in terms of all this. How are you managing with your business at this time, and what are you hearing from constituents and their businesses, and the type of aid and support that they would still like to see from the provincial and federal governments?
So I would say in terms of myself as a small business owner, each sector has been impacted differently by COVID. It's certainly not the same impact across the board by any means, and we know that. For example, I owned a small yoga studio, and we pivoted online very quickly. We were able to run outdoor classes during the summer, but we also made the decision, the very hard decision over the summer, to give back the physical keys to our space at the end of the summer, because we knew potentially we'd be going into a second wave and didn't want the financial and psychological pressures of trying to juggle rent further. And we also made the decision on October 31st to pause the business for now, because it was exhausting. It was exhausting for myself and my partner. I had assumed this new role. I didn't know how much I could contribute to the business, and people were really tired. And we made the decision to stop for the time being and reopen when it's safe to, because it wasn't viable for us. And it was, I wouldn't say it was an instant decision. Like for many people during COVID, it's been a learning process and kind of evaluating and reevaluating. And I would say that's what the government's been doing as well in terms of its supports of small businesses. One of my colleagues, Minister Hussein, said the one thing that we've learned during COVID is, as a government, is that we've learned to pivot quickly, that programs that in the past would take us 2-3 years to maybe implement, we see that we can respond quickly when we need to, but also re-respond. So when we see that things aren't working, to tweak programs and adjust. Perfect examples of that are with the SEBA, with the emergency bank account, which was available to folks. It started with a certain amount of money and debt forgiveness. We extended to increase the amounts of the loans when we needed to. from 40,000 to 60,000, and also increase the debt forgiveness if they were paid back within time, and the time is way off. It's not now. The HASCAP system, which is, again, industry by industry understanding it. HASCAP is the highly affected sectors credit program, credit affordability program. So recognizing some businesses needed a push right now, and larger loan structures than the CEBA, the emergency bank account, and those were structured. One of the biggest learning curves, I think, was with EI. We recognize that, and I'm from that sector, so I know, most yoga teachers, most fitness instructors, many people in the economy are what we call gig workers, meaning that they wear multiple hats and multiple contracts and multiple jobs, and don't necessarily pay into the EI and CPP system on their own simply because they can't afford it. And when COVID hit, there was no place for them to play. There was no safety net for them. And we've been adjusting and readjusting accordingly, first with the CERB, and then the CRB, and then the CRSB, which is the caregiver sickness benefit as well, because we're learning each time sick days are an issue now. It's always been an issue, but we know it's an issue that needs to be dealt with our provincial counterparts, but also at the federal level. So all of these supports, it's a learning process for all of us, but at the same time, this communication that we're having with the public is really informing the decisions as we go forward. And I'm really proud of what the government's been able to do to listen, implement, stop, pivot, listen again, and pivot, because we're in a new space, all of us, with this. And at least with the pivoting, we're answering as much as we can the uncertainties with each round that we go through during the pandemic.
All the abbreviations, it sounds almost
I know,
like
it's a lot.
sounds like it's it's also a Jewish community, Jewish community.
Yeah.
UJA, BB this.
Yeah. I mean, in
BT.
Hebrew, in Hebrew too, you have like the airport is Netzbag, and you have
Yeah.
like all these acronyms. So I've had to learn a lot of new acronyms in my new work as well, for sure.
Any new insight on vaccine procurement and their arrival and distribution? And
so last week we had, as Minister Anand had said several weeks ago, through interviews and also in the House, that we were past the worst of the delays. We had a 400,000 unit delivery of Pfizer last week, and we have a 43,000 delivery this week of both Pfizer and Moderna. And the ramp ups are going. We're still on target to what we were expected to receive at the end of March, which is great news. So 6 million doses by the end of March into Canada. And we're moving ahead. We're still waiting the approvals on AstraZeneca at the moment. But as far as our procurement schedule, we're on target for 84 million by the end of September for every Canadian who wants one. Oh. So it's moving. There's been some delays, but we are moving.
And are we satisfied with the plan for the distribution? And actually getting the needles in people's arms?
So as you know, it is provincial purview to handle the rollout of vaccines on the ground here. I had a great chat with Humber Hospital on Friday in terms of their plans to reach out into the community and what they're doing. The City of Toronto has been very proactive in their hiring during this time. I know there was a lot of frustration in the delays, but during that time, the city's been getting ready and identifying places where they can administer the vaccines. Even administering it's a complicated process because of the temperatures that they need to be stored in. And the city has been very proactive in leasing spaces, identifying key locations. We have one here in York Center. So the hangar at Downsview Park will be a main vaccine center for us here. But I've also heard some really creative ideas. Humber's been looking at ways to even potentially have a mobile unit with a bus that could go around and help seniors. The next stage of the rollout is the 80+ seniors who are at home. And how do we get to them? Some of them are afraid to leave their houses. So Humber's looking at creative ways of addressing that. And I'm certainly confident that the City of Toronto and public health here are working very proactively. I know OHN is doing what they can in terms of hiring. I can't really comment more than that. But our job is to deliver them, which we're doing, and to be supportive when needed, when we are asked.
So you'll forgive me if I still don't know all the intricacies between the roles of the federal and provincial
no,
government. That's
no,
what happens when you've only been back in Canada for 2 years after leaving in high school. um,
okay.
what inspired you to be involved in community service and to run for parliament?
So I've been involved in community service pretty much my entire career in various roles and in different parts of the world. So I haven't only lived here, I've lived in Israel for extended periods of time. And being active in community life and building community has always been the lens that I've worked out of. When I moved to Israel in my early 20s, I moved over there because of the Oslo Peace Accords and was very heavily involved in what we called the P2P track of Oslo, or the people to people track, because it really interested me to understand how we were going to live together. How, peace you don't just turn a switch and everyone is in peace mode. There's a lot of unpacking and rebuilding and reconciliation that needs to happen. And I wanted to be a part of that building process. And, being in Israel at that time really afforded me that opportunity. And from there, it was a natural segue into politics as well, where I was really fortunate to work at City Hall in the office of the mayor, where my key job was to go out into communities and identify need for a funding.
Who was mayor then? Was that Olmert?
Yes, it was
at that point?
Ehud Olmert.
You got into trouble being mayor at that time.
Not under my tenure, but
not under your tenure. Tell us a little bit more about your Israel experience and the work that you did there.
So while I worked in Israel, as I mentioned, so the two main roles that I had was working through the funded programs of P2P, people-to-people projects. At the time, I was working at Melit Centers for Education that had a specific center for Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, which was myself and a number of colleagues were responsible for managing. And when I finished my time there and moved into the mayor's office, I worked in the office of the mayor under the advisor for special projects. I was responsible for a private fund that had donated in perpetuity to the community of Jerusalem $1 million US a year to be, I love the way he worded it. He didn't want, the donor himself, who remains anonymous to this day, did not want a single plaque in Jerusalem with his name on it. Or as my boss would say, he didn't have the edifice complex. His goal was to really provide service to Jerusalem residents. So it was a service-based fund, which meant that I had the privilege of going out to nearly every corner of the city to work with the various departments of the city to assess needs of the community, of what they needed in terms of technology, in terms of programming, in terms of cultural programming and education, youth programming, safety, general safety, personal safety issues, health, you name it, as long as it didn't have to physically be built. And it really gave me such a window into the unique mosaic of what Jerusalem is. From here, we see Jerusalem one way. And when you are able to really go into the nooks and crannies in the various neighborhoods of the city, you learn about the cities within the city, from all the different religious, cultural, ethnic backgrounds that make up the fabric of what Jerusalem's society is. And it's complex and it's beautiful and it's complicated and it's challenging. I lived there during the second Intifada, which meant that safety-wise, it was a really hard time. I think it was harder for my mother than it was for me. But it really also opened my eyes. I've witnessed things that we shouldn't have to witness in terms of violence and tragedy. And it made me really value the importance of why social cohesion and shared societies are really important.
How do you think those experiences are impacting your vision and your work now as a member of parliament with the Liberal Party?
So I think community building is still important. I am a big advocate and supporter of the charitable sector here, in particular when it comes to mental health. Community-based mental health services really provide the lion's share of mental health support for community members across Canada and in the GTA. And it's really important for me to make sure that charitable organizations, particularly now, are supported because they're holding us up. There's a lot of things business-wise that are falling away and shifting and changing, but for those who potentially would fall through the cracks, charitable organizations and community service-based programs are working 24/7, whether their donations have come in or not. I mean, you're a rabbi at a shul. If donations are down, you're still there. You're still supporting your community and your congregants. And in terms of that framework, my experiences there really imprinted on me the value of that work, that it really is the framework of our societies. In terms of support for Israel and the Jewish community, obviously York Center has a very large Jewish demographic, and Israel is a vital piece of their sense of connection to Jewish identity, and what happens over there really affects them here. And it's my responsibility to be a voice for that, of support and concern in the government, which I am. But I also look at the lens of what is Israel now and what do we want it to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What is the Israel that we want to call home for not just ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren? And I still maintain that the safest Israel and Israel at its best will be a secure and safe Israel for all of its citizens with a resolution to the conflict. And I truly support efforts to encourage the parties towards that, even when it looks impossible. And I've seen it look impossible firsthand. So
yeah. I just want to translate the code, that the insider talk. When we talk about the conflict, we're talking about the conflict with the Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza. Sometimes people think of Israel and there's lots of conflict and they don't know what we're talking about. So I don't assume that the audience speaks the same inside talk.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Many in the Jewish community were upset that Canada vetoed, I think abstained. Is it
No.
The UN resolution that it had typically up until 2 years ago, voted against. I remember when you and I were talking about this previously, you had a really well thought out response to that question. I was wondering if you'd share that with everyone.
Okay, absolutely. So first of all, we have to look at the basket of votes during that time of year at the United Nations at the General Assembly. Each year there are a basket of votes in relation to Israel and the region that get tabled on the GA floor. And traditionally, I wouldn't say across the board 100%, but traditionally Canada has taken a policy position, and it continues to now, is that we won't allow Israel to be denigrated unfairly in international forums where it's being, pointed out unjustly in relation to, the world is a complex place with many, many actors who are involved in many, many things, and to single out Israel time and again on the GA floor is not something that we will support, and we continue to not support that. There were 15 votes on the GA floor or during that time. Out of those 15, there were 13 that we voted against, meaning that we voted against them in favor of Israel, meaning that we were supporting Israel on the GA floor. There were 2 votes, one we abstained, and the other one that we voted in support of the vote, and that's the vote on Palestinian self-determination. And I think it's important for people to understand that in terms of our voting record in Israel across all forms, and I'm talking about the World Health Organization and the other committees, whether it's the Human Rights Committee and so forth, this government has been very supportive of Israel. in terms of, if we just want to look at percentage wise, in the 6 years, 5+6 years that the Trudeau government's been in place, it's voted in support of Israel 91% of the time. And when we compare that to the Harper years of actual voting in support of Israel, the Harper government did that 62% of the time. Many times it abstained. It chose to withdraw its vote. When it comes to this particular vote about Palestinian self-determination, I think it's important that we understand why we're voting in favor of it. I don't see, and neither does the government see, that supporting Israel and supporting an end to the conflict are mutually exclusive of one another. We believe in a two-state solution, and we also believe that it is our role to indicate to both the parties that we are in support of that. And while we vote primarily in favor of Israel across the board when Israel is unjustly singled out, we also have a policy imperative to encourage the parties to move forward in ending the conflict. Israelis will be safer the day that the conflict ends. Palestinians will be safer and feel that they have the dignity and the rights that they deserve when the conflict ends. It's not up to us to dictate what that looks like. However, it is of critical importance that we continue to encourage the parties to move that way, however we can. And it also means that we can do that in other aspects of our policy, both with Israel and with the Palestinian Authority, to encourage them to come to the table, because ultimately we can choose to be part of a process to bring populations to reconcile, or we can stand back and the conflict will continue, and more generations of children will be raised not knowing what it's like to potentially live in a peaceful environment. That's not the Israel I want for me or for my children. I had family who lived there, and I don't think that's the Israel we want as a community. We want an Israel that is safe and secure.
So I understand all that, and I even agree with much of it. My question though is what changed 2 years ago such that Canada started voting differently on that resolution? Because up until 2 years ago, I believe it voted either against that resolution or to abstain from it. And so something must have changed to in the government's thinking in order to change that vote.
So we have to look at what's happening on the ground in Israel and recognize that things are changing there, just as life changes here, and we are confronted with different issues over time. Israel as well is changing and shifting in what it does in its own policies. And what we're seeing is, I'm a product of the Rabin generation. So when I went over for the Oslo Accords, Rabin was alive. I actually met him when I was in my undergrad at McGill. And he looked at me. I was the president of Hillel at the time, and he's like, "Mato sapo, tavoy abaita. What are you doing here?"
Yeah, but he said it. Ato sapo. Too many years smoking cigarettes for Robin.
Yeah. But the point was that at that time there was a recognition that it was critical for Israel to embark on this path, because we were running out of time in terms of actually creating two separate states. That if we wanted to keep Israel Jewish and we wanted to reconcile and come to a place of peace with Palestinians, that the way the populations were growing and moving and shifting, that we were actually running out of time to create what would be a contiguous Palestinian state in terms of land. And that was the early 90s. We're now in 2021, and the facts on the ground are that within the West Bank, there has been significant expansion of settlements. Canadian policy continues and has always, even under the Harper government, viewed the settlement as illegal. And that being because with the understanding that the parties must come to an agreement, whatever those land swaps will look like, to be able to accommodate the populations in a two-state structure. And we're moving further and further away from that being able to happen. And from the Canadian perspective, the growth of the settlements is a problem. And unfortunately, the current government in Israel while they're not building new settlements, settlement growth has expanded significantly. And it's going to make it harder and harder and harder for us to see a resolution on the ground that allows for a realistic two-state solution. And that is something that is very concerning to the government, and should be for all of us. Because if we don't get to that, then the alternatives, it's hard to entertain the alternatives.
In responsibility, with moving a two-state solution forward too. I mean, we tend to, when we have this in the conversation, we tend to always be talking about Israel's responsibility. What's the Palestinian responsibility for this?
Palestinians do have a responsibility to come to the table as well. There's no question that they need to. We've seen, there are definitely lightning rod issues that the community here views and justifiably so. For example, we're dealing with the UNRWA situation of Palestinian textbooks at the moment. We do know that Palestinian textbooks continue to be not in the language of neutrality, or not in the language towards peace thought and education that we would hope for in bringing two societies together. And it's
That's very diplomatically said.
Well, UNRWA doesn't, let's be clear, UNRWA doesn't write the textbooks.
Right.
UNRWA is responsible to administer the curriculum in the jurisdictions that it oversees the populations. And we as Canada actually support supplementary educational materials and training for teachers to bypass what is problematic material in Palestinian textbooks. That being said, the textbooks still exist, and the PA has a responsibility to address how it teaches its generations. You can't want peace but teach hate.
Right.
We're seeing some moves forward within the Palestinian Authority. They're having elections in May for their legislature for the first time in a very long time, and elections for their president in July. And we've seen Palestinian Authority resume its cooperation on the security front. It has to do its part to come forward as well. However, I think we also have to recognize that in the dynamics of this conflict, the PA is still subject to dependency on Israeli society and Israeli infrastructure. So where it gets its electricity from, where it gets its water from, the currency that it holds, its cell phone networks, everything that it does is in collaboration, or by default, just for its existence, is married into the Israeli infrastructure.
Right.
And this is why both parties, and this is why I say Palestinians have a responsibility, neither side can truncate itself from the other. And I think both sides need to really recognize that they are codependent to get to the table in order for this to end.
I really want to appreciate the knowledge that you have of this, and your understanding of the details of these circumstances, and the nuance with which you presented it. So thank you for that. We're running out of time, so I want to get us back to Canada, and to your role as an MP, and that is, ask what are the things that you're considering for private legislation that you're able to put forward?
That's a great question. So as I said, I am a rookie, and I'm still navigating my way. When I looked at where I fall on the line of a private member's bill at this point, I'm probably about 3 or 4 years out of tabling anything on my front. But that doesn't prevent me from doing the important work that's needed for constituents. One of the key things that I'm working on right now, 2 key items that I'm working on right now are, as we mentioned earlier, was the food insecurity. That for me was really a laser on how serious a problem it is. I think it was, I can't remember who I was meeting with, one of the organizations in the riding, when they highlighted to me the number of Holocaust survivors that were food insecure. It literally didn't let me sleep at night.
Yeah.
And I'm in ongoing conversations, both with, we lost the kosher food bank here in the last year. Organizations are scrambling. And I'm really looking at ways with Minister Hussein and with my colleagues to address food insecurity in a profound way within York Center and the riding, because it's not something I can live with. It's really far too important. And based on how we're looking at the budget proposals for 2021, I've done a tremendous amount of advocacy for sector support for the charitable sector with colleagues to make sure that we can look at those programs for food insecurity. And the other thing is Jewish housing and housing in general in the riding. I'm working with a number of synagogues here in the riding to open discussions on how we look at the assets that we have and how we repurpose them for the community going forward. Because Jewish housing is a problem, housing in the riding is a problem, and community gathering is also is an imperative for a healthy social and vibrant life, not just in our Jewish community, but our community as a whole. That spiritual connection is a vital one. And so those two pieces alone, I may not be putting forward a private members bill, but I'm looking for what are the key foundational pieces that we need to have strong, safe, secure, and resilient community life here.
Well, thank you, Yara.
You're welcome.
I should say you don't sound like a rookie. for someone who's a rookie,
Doing okay.
you have the issues on your fingertips,
Yeah.
and for someone like me who's a political wonk, it's like I appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. If I can just offer congratulations to Beth Tzedek on your wonderful news last week.
Thank you.
In terms of the LGBTQ2 community and marriage service, I think I'm quite proud of that, to have seen that, and I was happy to celebrate that point with the world. It's a tremendous commitment, and I want to applaud Beth Tzedek for that.
Well, thank you. It's all part of our effort to be an inclusive Jewish community and a relevant Jewish community, and to do so from the perspective of Jewish tradition, authenticity, and even halakha. And so if anybody's interested in finding out more about Beth Tzedek's decision to officiate at same-sex weddings, we invite you to read the letter that I wrote to the congregation on our website. And we have some educational opportunities that are coming up in March for people to learn even more about that. Everything that's happening at Beth Tzedek, of which there's a lot, especially this week as we celebrate Purim, the holiday based on the Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther, in which Jews celebrate basically their deliverance from perhaps the second historical major anti-Semite in Jewish history, and that is Haman. The first being Pharaoh, and the third being someone whose name I don't even like to mention, but just think World War II. Lots going on at Beth Tzedek, lots of opportunities to be spiritually engaged, even as we maintain our physical distance in this time of COVID. We thank you, Yara, for joining us, and we invite you, everyone else to check us out online, www.beth-tzedek.org. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.